Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. As many of you know, APSIA is the community for graduate schools worldwide that specialize in international affairs, and we're also the very proud home of the Public and International Service Advisor Network. And we're so glad to see so many PISA advisors here, including some who've truly only been PISA advisors for about 3 days after our last training workshop in Austin, Texas on Friday last week. So with this, we are pleased to continue our series to build up your knowledge and information about the many fantastic opportunities that are out there for your students. And so we're so glad that Caitlin and Maeve and Bianca could join us to talk about the Critical Language Scholarship and the wonderful opportunity this provides for your students to gain these critical skills that we know are going to be of service and in demand going forward in the workforce in the future. And so with that, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Caitlin. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to send me a direct message or my amazing colleague, Brittany Chor, for whom we are so grateful for setting up this workshop. And if you have any questions for our speakers, you can put those in the chat or also send those as a direct message to me, and we'll tackle all of those great things you want to explore after the presentation. And so with that, Caitlin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Tang. I am the Assistant Manager for Outreach and Selection for the Critical Language Scholarship Program at American Councils for International Education. Today, I'm joined by two of the CLS alumni ambassadors, Bianca and Wade. Thanks, folks, for joining. And for those of you who aren't already familiar with us, that's okay, that's why you're here. But the CLS program is a program of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, also known as ECA. And us at American Councils, we work closely with ECA to support the implementation of the program. So first, we want to thank everyone for inviting us to join today's advisor webinar. Really exciting to get to meet you all. Today, I will be focusing on covering the following topics with the help of Maeve and Bianca. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the CLS program, we want to do some introductions so we get to know who all has joined us. So if you wouldn't mind, advisors, please start introducing yourselves in the chat. So maybe you could write down your name, your position, your institution. If any of you are already CLS advisors, that would be cool to know. And while you all are typing, I'd like to also ask the ambassadors to introduce themselves. Maybe Bianca, you could go first and you could let everybody know your CLS language, your year, your program site, where you're at now if you're in school or if you've just graduated. And then also, what brings you here today? What are you excited to be able to share with folks?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Bianca. I participated in CLS Russian Summer 2022 last year in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. I'm currently a senior at Portland State University. So I'm graduating in about a month with a degree in business management and leadership. And I also currently work as a college program assistant for ACES, which is like a sort of similar international education nonprofit. And I'm really excited to be here. This program has opened a lot of doors for me and has been so impactful in my life. So I just want to give back to the program any way that I can. So yeah, thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Bianca. We're really excited to have you here today. Maeve, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Maeve Nepper. I did the CLS Arabic program last summer in Amman, Jordan. I just graduated from the University of Wyoming. I studied economics and international studies. And I'll be heading to Oman in the fall on a board scholarship to study Arabic as well. I'm here in part because, I'm from Wyoming and we actually have a very strong Arabic program here at the University of Wyoming, but there aren't always a lot of resources to go abroad, especially towards the Middle East and North Africa, which is the region that, I'm most closely affiliated with. So opportunities like CLS were really important to me in my language learning experience and study abroad and regional experience. So I'm hoping that I can help in this role, allow other students to go abroad as well.
All right. This has been wonderful getting to know the folks that are in the crowd, to hear a little bit about Maeve and Bianca. I'm really impressed. We've got study abroad offices, career centers, academic advising I'm seeing, and fellowship offices. This is a really good bunch. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So as you might know, the CLS program is an intensive summer opportunity. It is fully funded by the US government, and it provides American students with an opportunity to study one of 14 languages that are essential to our engagement with the world. That's why we've got folks here that reported Arabic and Russian, were their languages of choice. Maybe you thought to yourself, huh, those are interesting languages to have chosen. Well, Critical Language Scholarship Program, it's in the name, right? CLS scholars participate in courses and activities that are offered through partner institutes abroad, through which they develop regional and cultural knowledge, and they are able to form connections with local students and instructors. We have two offerings, so students may apply for the CLS program, through which they will study at a host institute overseas, but we also have CLS Spark, which is a virtual initiative, and it's specifically for beginning level Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit more. Hopefully I can kind of help clarify CLS program, CLS Spark, what do these refer to? So broadly, the CLS program, in this case, I'm using it as a plural, I'm saying CLS program and CLS Spark. They share this mission of wanting to support students in all fields of study to learn what the US Department of State refers to as critical languages, right? And these are the languages that tend to be less commonly taught in the US, despite being essential to the US's national security, economic prosperity, and again, our engagement with the world. In our overseas program, we offer instruction in 14 critical languages. That's on the left side of your screen. And you'll see that 12 of the languages offered require no previous language study. Right? Whereas on the right side of the screen, you'll see CLS Spark, which I had mentioned. And this is specifically for beginning level, and it's limited to 3 languages. Okay, so now depending on a student's target language and experience level, the student might need to make the decision as to whether or not they are applying for the CLS program at an overseas institute or through CLS Spark, which is a virtual program. Okay. Furthermore, some of the CLS program languages will have prerequisite requirements in order to go overseas. So Arabic, Korean, and Russian all require 1 year of experience. Japanese and Chinese require 2 years of experience. We do understand, though, that many students may not have access to formal courses in these languages on their campuses, right? So one goal for us is to increase access to languages that are less commonly taught, and especially to the applicants who might not be able to have these experiences because of what's offered at their institutions, right? Maybe there's no study abroad office, maybe there's no languages. Or not these languages, right? Maybe their courses have a super restricted schedule. Maybe their financial considerations. We'll go into that. But so here we have 2 different offerings in order to really be able to promote and give this experience to students across the US. I do want to point out that if there is some sort of requirement, an applicant needs to have a plan to meet that language requirement by the beginning of June. And that's when the CLS program starts every year, right? Summer program starting in June. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and discuss the structure for both of these programs, again, so you can get a better picture of CLS program, CLS Spark. So the CLS program takes place over the course of 8 to 10 weeks during the summer at Overseas Institute. These are the programs that Maeve and Bianca have participated in. In here, students are a member of a cohort. They share the same schedule over the course of the program, which includes 15 hours of language classes each week, cultural activities, local excursions. Sometimes there are 1 or 2 weekend overnight group trips. So as you can see, this is a pretty intensive and highly structured study abroad program. I wouldn't say it's the easiest summer that you could plan for. Participants also agree to a language policy where they expect to speak in only the language they are studying, just adding to that level of intensity, right? You're in a new environment. You're probably going to be overwhelmed at some point or just exhausted. We got to stay speaking that one language, Okay. Each participant is also paired with a language partner who is a local student or member of the host community to practice speaking outside of the classroom. So they're getting formal training then, but then also that colloquial experience, which is great. And CLS alumni do report that their language partners are often their favorite part of the program, and they become lifelong friends. Right? In addition to language learning, though, the CLS program does put a strong focus on the students to have an opportunity to connect with the local culture in their host country, and to be forming friendships with local people. So whenever possible, the CLS program does try to place students with host families. That was disrupted a little bit, of course, while during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic due to safety concerns, but we are looking forward to having a strong return to host families this summer. And then last but not least, students should not expect to have time in their schedules to participate in additional travel, research, or internship opportunities, right? You hear the name CLS program, that S stands for scholarship. So it can be confusing. You might think, oh, this is money that someone can apply to study a critical language, however they choose. Not quite. This is really an all-encompassed, really well-packaged program. And then there's CLS Spark. So CLS Spark also consists of group language and cultural courses taught by local instructors at those institutes, except this is conducted virtually. So here students participate in 10 hours of live classes each week, as well as cultural activities and consultations for each student's learning needs. And over the course of the program, students similarly participate in 90 hours of language learning in virtual classrooms, with complimentary on-program support from their very own dedicated program officer. You've got that same group format to the courses, and so students bond and make close connections with their peers, just as they would if they were in the overseas CLS program. CLS Spark also has monthly professional development workshops and networking opportunities built in. And the topics for these workshops are all about setting them up for their careers, for their futures, maybe the careers too long term. So we cover topics like applying for and funding passports, preparing to go abroad, the support for applying to future scholarship and fellowship opportunities, as well as career exploration workshops with CLS alumni and alumni ambassadors. So what's most important to know about these two programs is that they are fully funded. The CLS program that takes place abroad covers the round-trip international airfare to the program site, in addition to any applicable visa fees, housing and meals, classroom instruction, those cultural excursions, group trips, everything. CLS Spark, though, because it is conducted virtually, there's no travel component to it, but there is the tuition that is covered. There are all those activities that are provided. There's also a technological and connectivity stipend that we offer. It's small, it's modest, but it is definitely enough so that if someone needs to reinforce their laptop, if they need to get an internet booster of some sort, they want to invest in a better microphone, headset, they can certainly do all of that, right? And then all alumni receive undergraduate academic credit through Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, as well as a certified APSIA OPI test score and certificate to verify their language progress. These are very well recognized, both, right, academic credit from a US institution and this OPI test score. And so that's great, and that means that students can actually show that they have this experience and the impact of these experiences on their resume, right? And that makes it a little bit more tangible for folks outside of the language arena, or outside of the critical language arena, because they'll recognize, oh, this was a credit-bearing study abroad program. Oh, they have this formalized language test. Great. Whether participating abroad or in a virtual program, participants do make significant gains in their language abilities. I hope that comes to no surprise for all of you. But the participants do report and tests show that they gain a year's worth of language learning over the summer. And that's really impressive. They get those OPI certificates that I had mentioned. And for the CLS Spark participants, if they remain eligible to apply again after they complete that summer in that program, they have the benefit of automatic semifinalist status for the CLS program overseas for the following year in the same target language. Okay, That's huge. So if Maeve or Bianca had done CLS Spark last year, they could then be applying, or they could have already applied, right, to then be going overseas, and they could be preparing to go overseas right now, and they would have had that boost semifinalist status. Students also, though, demonstrate and build cross-cultural understanding and language skills, which give them an edge in careers in our globalized workforce. I know our folks in the career centers are really familiar with the different employment surveys and what attracts someone who's doing a hiring search. And a lot of times it's things exactly like cross-cultural understanding, language skills, right? Flexibility, all these things that we're going to be building on this program. Resiliency, confidence, growth mindset. All of these are things that students build through participation in CLS. And last but not least, CLS program alumni also receive non-competitive eligibility hiring status with the federal government. And this is a great perk or advantage to any students who are interested in applying to jobs with the federal government. Okay. You might be familiar with usajobs.gov. That's where a lot of people would go if they want to have a job in the government. For many of us, you just start off and you're creating an account. It's kind of like the bare minimum, and it's bare bones. The folks that have this NCE status, they're in their own pool. They get contacted before any of the rest of us. All right. At this point, I would like to turn to Bianca and Maeve and let them share their perspectives. As we do so, please be jotting down your questions. We're not going to do Q&A until after everything is done, but I don't want you to lose your questions. So start them now, okay? All right. So Maeve, why don't you go first this time? And can you share with us a little bit about, who you were as a student and what your motivation was when you were applying for the CLS program?
Sure. So I actually applied for CLS 3 different times before I was finally accepted. And I think that that's probably a pretty recurring theme amongst many CLS students, is applying multiple times. When I started university, I had just finished a similar State Department program, NISLY-Y, where I had studied Arabic in Jordan. And then the first year I applied, I was an alternate. And the second year I applied, I was not a semi-finalist. And then the third year I applied, I was a finalist for the scholarship, and I went back to Jordan. So one thing that was my motivation for applying, and I think also helps the CLS application, is showing dedication to language study over a long period of time. So consistent reapplying, and then also showing in between years what I had done to continue my language study on my own, whether it was university courses or working with tutors or self-study. I also did a study abroad program through my university to an Arabic speaking country. So I think all of those things combined were the way that I tried to showcase my commitment to studying Arabic, and the way that it would then benefit me to have further study through the CLS program. So that's where I was sitting as a student. I completed CLS in the summer between, I guess, what would have been my junior and senior year, my third and fourth years in university. And I think personally that was also I benefited from it being at that point in my language study as well.
That's great. And I think you're bringing up a really important point, that with these competitive programs, you don't always get it the first time, right? And that's hard for students, but that is a learning experience for them as well. This is, kind of like quote unquote failure with a safety net, because they're applying for something that is very aspirational, right? It's something that is amazing, though it's not probably something that they had planned for their entire lives. It came up, it's an exciting opportunity, and now they get to practice this new skill set. And then hopefully they get to be abroad, or they get to be having this immersive, intensive experience learning a new language online. But it's not make or break, and you've got multiple opportunities to apply for it, right? That's really wonderful, because, right, we all know later down the line, you're applying for a job. There might be a lot more writing on that. This is a good practice earlier on. Bianca, what about you? Where were you at, and what was your motivation like when you were applying?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to say I see in the chat there's an advisor from Grinnell College, and one of my best friends from the program, Pierce, just graduated from there. So it's really cool to see the advisor here today with us. So I, similar to Maeve, applied twice before I got accepted, and I also participated in NISLY-Y Russian Summer 2020. So that gave me a little bit of like a starting point for the Russian language. And I was dual enrolled at both my community college and at my like main university. So I was at a point where I felt like I wanted to sort of like really tie in Russian to the business studies that I was doing. My main motivation for applying was I come from a like Balkan background. My parents are from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I always I grew up in a community with a lot of Russian speakers. And I grew up with the language, and I always felt like it was something that I wanted to study, but also tie it into business. And so I just had a lot of motivation there, with the similarities in the languages and the culture. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you both for sharing that. I do want to remind folks, though, that we have programs that are open to beginner level students, students that have no prior experience in because they're applying for beginner level languages. The standards there are different, right? We still want a connection to be drawn between the language and why they're applying for the program and what their long-term goals look like. But we also understand that they are newer or younger or at a different point in the experience. Okay. What resources did you both draw on in preparing your applications for the CLS program? And did you think it varied at all between the first attempt and your successful?
The time that I was accepted, I was actually abroad while I was applying, so I actually had very few resources for that particular semester. But one thing that think was probably the most impactful was talking to previous alum of the program, connected with them specifically through the CLS Ask Alumni Facebook page that exists. I believe that's the name. But I think one thing that piece of advice that they gave me that I incorporated in my application over the various years that I applied was showing a concrete way that studying Arabic would impact my long-term career goals. And every time I applied, I tried to be more and more specific about what that was. So the first time it was sort of, I'm interested in the Middle East. I went to Jordan on Nisli Y, and so I'd like to go back and continue studying Arabic. And then the second time I applied, I talked more about being an economics student and wanting to work combine Arabic and economics in that way. And then the third time I applied, I talked very specifically about my interest in natural resource economics, specifically energy, and the connections between Arabic and the Middle East and energy in the Middle East, and then energy in my home state of Wyoming. So I think being very, very specific over the course of those 3 years, which sort of just developed naturally as I developed my own interests over time throughout university, helped my application become stronger because I was really able to make a case as to how I would use Arabic moving forward into a post-grad career.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing. And smart, right? Be specific. Also, ensure that or tell your students and encourage them and remind them what they put down on paper is their best guess, right? As to what the future will look like, not written in stone. I think we all know students get a little bit scared about that sometimes. I used to be a fellowships advisor, if you can't tell by sort of the way I'm feeding off of the ambassador's perspectives, but I used to tell my students all the time, there is no NSF, there is no CLS police, there's no one coming back afterwards 5 years saying, did you do what you said you were going to do? No, life changes and evolves, that's fine. But like, dare to dream, put that down on paper, that's cool. All right. Bianca, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, I would say similar to Maeve, definitely I got more specific the more times that I applied. And I definitely, one of the main resources that I used when preparing my application, especially the second time, was my Russian professor. I felt like she really helped kind of like rein me back in, make my application a bit more specific, kind of, have a clear direction that I was going with. I think that I probably should have reached out to like my on-campus advisor as well, just for like extra feedback. Definitely, I would suggest for students to do the same.
All right. And then I'm gonna toss out 2 questions at once, and you can choose which one you want to respond to. But I think we would all love to hear either a memorable or favorite experience that you had from your time on the CLS program, or maybe something that you wish you had known or that you wish someone had told you before you went and participated on the CLS program.
Think one thing I wish I had known, or maybe I could combine this with a memorable experience, is that students are learning the language just by being in the country. And there's so much value to the out of classroom language immersion and cultural experience, almost just as valuable as the actual hours spent physically in the classroom, if not more valuable. So I think one thing that I wish I had known, or sort of, I guess maybe adapted while I was there, was the amount of hours that I spent studying over or outside of classroom hours. I really attempted to, study as much as I could to complete my homework, and then spend the majority of my time out in the city really trying to actually speak the language and being immersed in that sense. And I think those honestly led to some of my most memorable experiences around Amman, interacting with people at restaurants or my language partners. So I would say as intensive as a program it is from the academic perspective, so much of the language learning occurs outside of the classroom. And I don't think I fully realized how much of that was true until I was actually there and trying to balance the academic portion of it with the time that I spent out in my host country.
That's a really good point. You might think that you're going to be having like vocabulary words and conjugations floating around in your head at night, and it might be like thinking about perfecting your order, at that one cafe. Great. Bianca, what about you?
Yeah, I would say two things that I wish I had known before I went abroad was the first one being that I do not have to be afraid of my language partner. I was personally really nervous before meeting my language partner. I just felt like my language level was too low and I would just totally confuse her and make a fool of myself. But like I think Caitlin mentioned earlier, my language partner experience was probably the most rewarding experience of the whole program, because it was someone my age who just really like took me around the city and introduced me to so many parts of the culture and the language that I wouldn't have been able to interact with on my own. So that was really, really rewarding. And I hate that I was so nervous beforehand. And the second thing would be, I wish I had went in knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to slip up. I'm going to sometimes look like a fool, and that's a completely normal part of the program. You go into a very new situation, new country, new culture, a lot of ambiguous, uncomfortable situations where you're kind of out of your element. You don't know what you're doing. And that's totally fine and totally normal. And that's a whole part of the process of adjusting to a new culture and a new language.
Well put, both of you. Very articulate. All right. So thank you, Maeve and Bianca, for that wonderful discussion. We'll move on now to just briefly discuss becoming an advisor and some overall things that maybe this would be helpful for you to know moving forward. Okay. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get them very shortly. Okay, so if any of you are thinking about becoming a CLS advisor on your campus, but you're not already, I do want to just go over quickly what those responsibilities would look like. So each CLS advisor is first and foremost expected to be an advocate for the CLS program and to help us promote this program on campus, both to the students, but also to the faculty. As you heard, sometimes it's the language instructors that are helping students prepare their applications or hear about this experience. So we need this network to be built. CLS advisors are also expected to support students in applying for the award. So be available for students to come and ask you questions. Maybe they'll have an essay that they want you to read over, or they're going to have questions about how do I start writing this kind of essay. They're going to need support, right? And then, of course, we need our advisors to be up to date on the application, on the program requirements, and to be a point of contact then for both us with the CLS program and American councils, but also the U.S. Department of State for just general outreach. Okay. As an advisor, then it would be important that you know our eligibility criteria, or maybe for the folks that are in offices that just get asked these questions anyway. I know sometimes it feels bad to be like, I got nothing for you. Go ask this person, right? So maybe you can take some notes down about the eligibility. Students are eligible for the CLS program if they are US citizens or nationals enrolled in an accredited degree granting program at a US-based institution at the time of applying. They can be studying abroad, that's fine, but their home institution needs to be US-based. Programs must be 18 years old, I'm sorry, by May before their program. You need to have completed at least 1 full year of college level study before their program. So that means when they're applying in the fall, they can be in their first year, that's fine, as long as by that May, they've completed a full year and they've turned 18. Okay. Applicants to the CLS program at overseas institutes may be at the undergraduate or graduate level. That's also including associate's degrees and professional degrees, whereas applicants for Spark must be studying at the undergraduate level. And I did comment on this before, but students can be from any field of study. We want applications from students from all majors, all fields, all levels really of language learning. And we really do encourage students from all disciplines to be thinking about how critical languages can inform their career paths, right, in their fields of study. And here's just an overview of our 2022 Overseas and Spark finalists. And what you'll see here is that our cohorts truly are diverse. We think this is a great strength of the CLS program. And so we're proud of the diversity of our CLS scholars. And I'm gonna say the advisors are critical in helping us recruit students from different backgrounds and who have different levels of life experience. And so we hope that you can join us in this endeavor. And then very briefly, the selection criteria and the very brief overview of the selection process. For the overseas CLS program, applicants would be required to submit an unofficial transcript at the time of application and respond to a series of short essay prompts. At this time, there is no letter of recommendation required. Right? The essays will reflect the selection criteria that are shown on the slide, but ultimately there are 2 key elements for students to underscore in their responses. One is how the proposed language learning connects to their academic or career goals. And 2, that the student has the maturity, the self-awareness, and resiliency to succeed in this intensive language program. And that they're going to be able to contribute to a productive and supportive group environment, right? Being on Zoom those extra hours is not easy, but it's not a place really for the snark. Being in a group environment abroad when you're absolutely exhausted or when you have more energy than everybody else is also a tiring experience. Okay, so what self-awareness do you have? How are you going to bring everybody up with you? All right. For CLS Spark, it will also be responsible for preparing short essays. However, here the selection criteria are different. As I said before, we are really looking to give an opportunity to students who might not otherwise be able to engage with this language. And so CLS Spark is really great for students who might have very restricted class schedules. We do see a lot of applications coming in from students who are in STEM fields, who are pre-med, ROTC. Students at institutions that don't offer this language, or these languages, I should say, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, or maybe they only offer 1 class per year, and so it's like you hit or you miss, right? Explain that. That's a really good reason to be applying for this. Maybe there's financial considerations. Students can take on the burden of paying for extra credits, right? They got to get in, they got to get out. Maybe they can't afford the study abroad experience. So this is a program that's really about being sort of a pipeline and the stepping stones that they're getting the language experience, and that in the future, hopefully, they can also have that study abroad experience. And now here we have the general timeline. So the application opens each year in the fall. This year we're hoping for an October, early October start date. And we're going to start contacting advisors, letting them know about this in September. Okay, so we're already working on those dates. And it closes each year the Tuesday the week before Thanksgiving. Okay, we're not crazy. We're not doing it the week of Thanksgiving. It's already a hectic time. So right, this year we're planning for an early October launch, and then there'll be about 6-7 weeks later the close right before Thanksgiving. By late January, every applicant is notified of whether or not they've advanced to the semifinal round of selection. Notification is done by email. Make sure your students are providing a valid and properly typed email address for the application. This year we had someone who wrote outlook.com. And somehow that went through and didn't bounce. So they submitted that, and we submitted a notification email to that email address. And we didn't get told that that was a defunct email address. And so then the student emailed correctly several months later being like, hi, I haven't heard from you guys. So, you know, just be really careful about your typing. So in January, late January, you hear about the semifinalist rounds. Those who advance that round can expect them to be notified as to whether they are a finalist or an alternate or non-select in early March. Okay, and then there's about 2 weeks before the finalists can accept, or 2 weeks for a finalist to accept their award before we start making promotions to alternates. Every year we get asked, what are my odds of being promoted? What am I going to hear if I'm promoted? Unfortunately, that is a very flexible process, and there's no hard answers there. It depends on how many finalists decline and at what time, right? And we don't do a ranking system, so I can't even be like, you're number one, you know, alternate up for promotion. Don't have any of that information. So as an advisor, it's important that you know that so that you can hang tight and practice some patience with your students, because it's a nerve-wracking time. All right. And then I want to point out that for advisors, we do have a lot of resources that are listed on our website. So if you want to read up on any part of the program or see what sort of templates we already have available for promoting this program, we've got email templates, social media templates, PowerPoint templates, etc. Go ahead and check out our website. And then a final plug, I just want to say, because I think this is really special, the CLS program actually engages professionals across the country each year to participate in the selection process and to serve as reviewers. It's unique. Some programs have a very set and a smaller finite group of reviewers, not the CLS program. We're looking for advisors. We're looking for language faculty, area specialists, CLS alumni to help participate in this process. It's a volunteer opportunity, but it is an excellent way to deepen your understanding of the program and learn what makes an applicant stand out at the national level. Okay, this is a process that we conduct each winter. It begins as soon as the application cycle closes, so right after Thanksgiving, and then it runs throughout early the next year, so between January, early February. Okay, and you can now indicate your interest in participating in this process when you sign up to become an advisor on the same page, like yes, contact me for future selection opportunities, or you can go to that same page and you can just update your information and check off that box too. All right, so that's just about 40 minutes. So thank you again for inviting us today, listening to me blab on. I'm gonna now zip it and say that if you have any questions, we'd love to hear and help try to answer them. And I will also drop the email in the chat in case you get questions down the road. But thank you all so much for having us.
Well, thank you all for sharing your good wisdom and insights. I have a couple of questions. Some of them are technical in process, but one of them, and I'm curious for the answers from each of you, one of these key criteria is that adaptability and resilience. To Maeve and Bianca, how do you feel like you showed that in your application? That's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to show. And Caitlin, overall, are there particular ways that advisors can counsel students beyond just saying, I am resilient? Because anybody can write that. So to our students, I'm curious how you were able to really bring that forward in your application.
I think this was also one area of my application that I've improved as I continued applying. I believe the last time I applied for CLS, I talked about a specific experience related to harassment I had while I was studying abroad in Morocco, and how I moved on from that and how it impacted my overall experience and how I continued to enjoy my time in Morocco in spite of that. But I would say that while I used an experience from a different study abroad opportunity, it does not need to be an experience showing your resilience and adaptability from a study abroad opportunity. It can be anything in the student's life. So that was one thing, but I would say that specificity, I think from that, telling a specific story and then what I did to overcome that was one thing that I changed as I applied multiple times.
Yeah, I would say the basically same thing as Maeve. I told a specific story about how when I was visiting family in the Balkans, I had neon pink hair, and I got a lot of stares and a lot of judgment from people for that. And that was a bit difficult for me at the beginning to adjust to. But something I talked about in my application was that I just had to sort of adapt and understand that this is a different culture. There are cultural differences, and it's okay. Like, it's not something that I need to be bothered by. So talking about that and being really specific about that. And I also talked about, for example, staying like adaptable and resilient to challenging times while abroad. I talked about tapping into my own background, coming from like a Balkan Slavic background. There are similarities between the cultures of the Balkans and Russian culture. So I wanted to be able to help other students that may be struggling with adapting to a culture that is sometimes not super easy to adapt to.
Those are great examples that you both provided, which makes sense. That's why you got it. I would say from my end, what the reviewers are looking for, it's a couple of things. And I don't think as advisors, it's going to surprise you all. One, yes, they need to go beyond, I am adaptable. I am flexible, right? I know. That's like step one is like, know what they're looking for. Okay. But then step two is that you actually demonstrate it. So it's important that you work with students to help them go through their different stories or experiences that they have and pick one that makes sense. Pick one that they're comfortable talking about. Pick one that, a sense of like enthusiasm or pride comes out. Some experiences lend themselves to this kind of discussion, some don't. And so a lot of times students need help in that. No, it doesn't have to be a study abroad experience, but it should relate to the demands of the CLS program because that's going to demonstrate to the reviewer that they know what they're getting themselves into. Okay, so if you have a study abroad experience, great. But maybe it's just that you went to a college campus and it turned your life upside down because something was different in the campus as compared to your family environment. Okay, that would be cool. Maybe they transferred school systems when they were young, right? Maybe they had an experience when they joined like a sports club for the first time, right? All of those could be fine. That's great. All that has to get to do with that, like the group dynamic and the culture of the group. So those would all be wonderful. Maybe you want to talk about the intensity. Maybe that's what they want to focus on. And so you can think through then when in their lives they had very intense schedules or very intense expectations they wanted to meet if not exceed. Right? So talk through with students and see what comes out in terms of like what kind of story can they tell succinctly, but very in a very detailed manner. Okay. And then the next step, because again, you can't just say I'm adaptable, here's my experience. I think you need to actually provide the analysis. You need to show, here's what I learned, here's what I took, here's how I can apply this to the future.
Thank you to all three of you. Those were really implementable things that folks can do to build out better answers there. And thanks to everybody. Keep the questions coming in, either publicly or just to me. One question on the financial component to all of this. You mentioned that they get credit from Bryn Mawr, as well as in some cases having to maintain matriculation at their existing university. Can you talk about how those financial pieces work and what kinds of obligations the students take on versus what's covered by the scholarships?
Okay, yes. So students need to be enrolled at their university, and we're going to work on clarifying some of this wording. just because what that means is different to every university, right? But we do expect students to be enrolled at the university at the time of application, okay? By the summer, they can have graduated, and we do not care. They do not need to be students at the time of the program. Okay, so in that sense, they're taking on no additional financial burden. They don't need to still be enrolled for courses to maintain that current enrollment status, none of that over the summer. Okay, Bryn Mawr then, after the program is over, will verify the course completion, the grades that the students earned on the program, and they will then provide the home institution with an update of what those courses would be accounted for at the home institution, right? And again, no cost to the students.
Thank you for clarifying that. There's always, the money is always the thing that trips people
always,
up.
Right. Yeah, and it's Boren, just to be clear, Boren has more strict requirements about being a currently enrolled student during the program. And because we're very similar in terms of we want these non-traditional language opportunities, it's, it's understandable that there's a little confusion at times. Yeah.
So a couple of translations or definitions, and then a few other questions that I have. Caitlin, you mentioned OPI, and for those who don't know how that's a marketable thing, could you translate that a little bit and talk a little bit about what it is so that folks can understand what a perk that is?
So I'm actually going to let Bianca and Maeve do this one, only because I have not had the pleasure of completing an OPI, but they did in order to have their full alumni benefit. So I'm going to let them handle that if that's okay with them. Yeah. Bianca's smiling. I think she's in for it. Go ahead, Bianca.
I just have quite a bit of experience with the OPI, having done it for NISLE Y, but also for CLS. I know for CLS, because Russian requires previous study, I had to take the OPI, which is the oral proficiency interview, both before the program, and then once I came back, I also took it again. And what that entails is you schedule a time and a date, and you get a phone call from the interviewer or the person that's going to be administering your test, and they are a fluent speaker in the language. And essentially, you just have a conversation in that language, and they are sort of testing your language level, kind of like where your vocabulary sits at. There's a lot of information online on kind of like how it works. And I believe a part of it is kind of called like a language breakdown. They're looking for the point where the student sort of like starts to lose the vocabulary, is kind of like really reaching for something. And so they're really trying to see where the student is at. And this was a really great way to gauge sort of like the gains that we made over the summer. We did not get our scores from the pre-test until after the program. So once the program was completed and we took the post OPI, we got both scores. And so it was really cool to see like growth from before and after. And for example, I list this score on my resume on LinkedIn. I often use it in conversations with other students or alumni or advisors who are familiar with it, but it is a nicer way of saying, or like a very clear indication of, oh, okay, so this is where I'm at with the language, rather than just saying like, yeah, I speak Russian.
Thank you. Caitlin, a question to you. You mentioned the citizenship and nationality criteria. Are DACA students eligible for CLS or no?
I don't believe they are, unfortunately. It is U.S. citizens and nationals at the time of application.
Okay. And then, Maeve, you had mentioned that you sought out someone from the Ask Alumni Network database family. Could you talk a little bit more about that for advisors who don't yet have a body of alum they can draw on and someplace they can point students?
Sure. So there are, I believe they're unofficial. I don't think they're actually associated with the official CLS program, but there are various Facebook groups where many students go to ask alumni questions about the application process. And then once selection notifications go out about studying abroad. So I think that was a really useful tool because it's very informal and you can sort of pose a question to the group and see who comes back with an answer. The other thing would be the Alumni Ambassador Program that is officially tied to CLS, and Bianca and I are both CLS Alumni Ambassadors. And so we and about, I think, 20 to 25 other alumni ambassadors have opted in to serve as resources for applicants throughout this coming year. So if students have a question, all of our contact information and bios are on the CLS website. You can also reach out to any of the CLS alumni ambassadors as well, who have had recent experience on the CLS program. And then while I'm sitting here, I'll look for the name of the Facebook group that I know a lot of students turn to and put it in the chat.
And we often speak at the CLS Alumni Association annual conference, and they're just a really helpful and great group of folks. So advisors, I invite you to invite your students to go seek out those really helpful people. We have just a couple minutes left. So if you have any last minute questions, please, again, feel free to put them in the chat or send them over to me. I guess my last question is for our ambassadors. You obviously, nothing was written in blood, but you had to talk about your professional aspirations as part of your application. On this side of the program, how do you see it fitting into your long-term journey and being an asset as you move forward professionally? Nobody wants to go first. Bianca, please.
Yeah, when I think back to my application for the most recent cycle for 2022, for when I got the scholarship, I talked about how I wanted to apply my business skills and my Russian skills to work in fashion in Russia. And obviously since then, things have changed, the environment has changed, so that's no longer necessarily something that's on the table, or no idea when that will be an option in the future. But going abroad, especially to Central Asia, really honestly changed the trajectory of my life and really changed how I want to use Russian and where I want to take my career. Since participating, I am really honestly really looking forward to just going back to Central Asia, whether it's in Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan, and continuing to build on my Russian, whether it's working for a university, working with students there, working with like as a resident director at some point, any way that I can just sort of like live in that region and continue to experience the culture and use the language. So definitely changed a lot, but that's because of CLS.
Plus the food is really good in Bishkek, so you can just go back. Maeve, please.
So I didn't necessarily change plans once I entered university, but I did understand more what I wanted to do with my future. So I'm really interested in working in international development, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region. And then anything that has to do with sort of economics and natural resource economics in particular, I find really fascinating. So I'm will likely be going on a BOR in this fall, but I'm also waiting to hear on a Fulbright specifically to study water scarcity in Oman. So I think CLS helped me understand more clearly what I wanted to do and what my aspirations were in the Middle East and North Africa, and then also helped me then, even though the program is specifically for language study, hone in on how that language was relevant to my careers, which then also helped with my applications for programs like BOR and Fulbright, and hopefully grad school sometime down the road. So I think even the application process in and of itself is a valuable experience, even if the student isn't ultimately selected. Really thinking about what their goals are and how language can tie into those goals in a future career, even if it's not what they end up doing, was a really valuable experience to me and has helped me sort of solidify what I'm interested in moving forward.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Maeve. That's exactly the advice we love to give to students and advisors. So I want to thank our three fantastic speakers for sharing all of their wisdom with us today. And to all of our PISA advisors, we're so glad to have you as part of the network and as part of these conversations. As a couple reminders, we will have another advisor webinar in June, this one focused on the virtual student federal service. That's just for you advisors. And then for your students, our small group personalized conversations about graduate school continue. We'll have one tomorrow on careers in public diplomacy, and then coming up careers focused on energy, sustainability, and climate. and then one on human rights, social justice, and law. And you get those in your regular Friday blasts. And then in July, we'll have our big graduate school online recruitment fair, where your students can come and really tell their stories and get their personal questions answered from all of APSIA's leading programs. So we really look forward to seeing you online virtually and maybe someday actual human contact again when it's possible. But thank you all for being a part of this great conversation. And thanks again to our wonderful CLS speakers. It was a great session and I really learned a lot too. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much. And Brittany, we can end recording.